So I'm Laurent Fargeton, and I'm manager of the division monitoring of vineyards and winemaking at Vivelis. And so I'd like to thank the organization of these vintage reports, which allows us to highlight the fundamental role of winemaking in improving the quality and optimizing the grape profile. So, and I will say in the line of the topic of the day, at the end of this presentation, I will highlight the key areas that, for me, needed to be managed this year with a technical and challenging vintage. So, first of all, we have to point out the technological chain of production of wines with its two pillars, which are the wine profile and the grape profile. So the wine profile is the objective, what the winemaker wants to do. The grape profile, on the opposite, determines the grape potential. And this year, in particular, as Cecilia said, it brings to winemakers some challenges, some issues that we have to work with. And so all the work of optimizing the production chain consists in upgrading the grape profile to the wine profile, considering that the grape profile is compatible with the objective. And so for 25 years now, we have built in Vivelis the knowledge so as to learn how to adapt the process depending on the grape profile and its potential. So to simplify this, we have divided the field of the different wine styles into 6 major wine styles. I want to represent that in more details, but to understand that, each wine style groups together wines that are similar chemical and reactional characteristic with respect with the major winemaking parameters that are oxygen, lees, oak. And so for each wine style, considering that the grape potential isn't standard, it's necessary then to adjust the extraction methods and the quantity of oxygen or the type of oak so as to get the perfect answer to each wine style. So for example, if we take a look on the oxygen part, here you can see the differences in terms of quantity of oxygen that different wine styles will need to deal with different negative characteristics such as veggie characters, or to increase the quality, that means improving the color or softening the tannins. So that means that we need to adjust this quantity of oxygen depending on the wine style. And there is another thing that we have to keep in mind is that 80% of that quantity of oxygen should be added before malolactic fermentation because it's where wines are more reactive to oxygen and benefit more from that parameter. So that's just one part of the different decisions that we have to make in function of the wine style. Next, concerning the extraction. So here, for example, we have some presentation about something that we learned during an R&D program that we conducted internally in 2012, where we found out that the temperature and the moment of extraction could have a huge impact in terms of polyphenolic content at the end of alcoholic fermentation. So here, for example, we can see that a high temperature maceration, pre-fermentative maceration, can lead to an higher extraction of tannins, but not that much of anthocyanins. So which means that if you do such a maceration, you can go to a worse ratio between tannin and anthocyanins than if you just apply a moderate temperature of maceration like 77 degrees. So it's important to notice that there is no one-size-fits-all method about extraction, and one method of extraction could work on one wine style, but not on the other. So adjustment is really necessary. Now let's point out the impact of oxygen addition, and in particular the continuous and the punctual addition. So the oxygen could be added in 2 ways, in a punctual way and in a continuous way. For the punctual way, in general during alcoholic fermentation, it's necessary to add a significant intake of 10 milligrams per liter in a few hours during alcoholic fermentation to enable yeast to produce sterols that we will need to resist alcohol. And so after that, we have our option to add oxygen in a continuous way during alcoholic fermentation, between alcoholic and malolactic fermentation, or after malolactic fermentation. And every time, it will change the structures and aromas of the wines produced. So it's really important to be precise on this oxygen addition. If we go in further details on the first impact during alcoholic fermentation, the first impact of oxygen is concerned the fermentation kinetics during alcoholic fermentation. So here on the left, we can see the impact and evolution of the yeast population between a control and an oxygen added modality. So the control is in orange and the oxygen added modality in purple. And we can see clearly a better stability of the yeast population even after the growth phase. So the consequence of that oxygen addition at a very specific moment is a shorter fermentation, non-interrupted fermentation, and most of the time, something like between 10 to 30% shorter fermentation. And during our collaboration with INRA of Montpellier, this collaboration has enabled us to demonstrate as well that only a punctual addition allowed significant gain in fermentation kinetics. And to be effective, this contribution should be done in 12 hours after the Vmax happened. The Vmax is a specific moment that corresponds exactly to the end of growth phase. So the moment and the quantity of oxygen are really important to be effective. Then if we take a look on the other part of oxygen contribution, here, for example, are the representation of the changes that oxygen can bring to the wine, and in particular, color intensity. So, for example, here, we have a comparison between two different oxygen modalities and a control during alcoholic fermentation. And so what we found out is, to be effective as well, we need to add at least 10 to 15 milligrams per liter between 50% to 85% of alcoholic fermentation. When it's done like this, you can go to something very significant in terms of color intensity. But during aging, even after alcoholic fermentation, the oxygen could have the same type of impact. Here, once again, comparison between a control and two oxygen-added modalities. And the impact concerning color intensity seems to correlate with the quantity of oxygen added. And once the oxygen supply stops, you can see that the color intensity decreases as on the control, but the differences generated during the supply still is here. So that's exactly what happened with oxygen. We increase the color and we maintain the difference during aging. Last slides concerning the impact of oxygen during winemaking. Here, for example, a comparison between, once again, a control and two oxygen-added modalities on the profile. And you can see that the wine obtained are completely different from the control and also obtained from each other. And apart from decreasing the negative features such as veggie characters, we can see that we can change completely and very strongly the profile obtained. And in that sense, oxygen gives a good place in profile creativity with the same wine. And so that's what we will point out, focusing on the vintage 2019. So during this vintage, like we said, it was a very technical vintage with a main characteristic, which was a low sugar loading, leading to low to medium potential of grapes, and some issues with polyphenolic contents, like we said this morning. And so, sometimes some winemakers try to compensate this by waiting longer. And so, depending on the picking date they choose, we had some different situation in the wine style map I presented you before. So here, for example, the global presentation of the different situation we had during this vintage. In general, for this kind of vintage, the priority should be put on first extraction and stabilization of the color. We don't have a lot of color, so the objective is to extract as much as possible color. and then to make it the most stable as possible. Then, like we said, we have low to medium potential, which in general corresponds to low to medium aromatic potential of wine. And so in that case, the objective is really to extract as much as possible aromatic potential from berries, or to drive the fermentation so as to create aromas with the help of yeast. And then, depending on the picking date, sometimes we have to manage veggie notes, or we need to avoid extraction of dry tannins, depending on the picking date. And at the end, we have to increase the mouthfeel in mid-palate. So if we take a look at every separate situation, we will see that the picking date has a crucial role in the way winemaking should be controlled this year. And for example, this first case that we represent the early picking date with some veggie notes to deal with. So in that case, the objective is really to decrease the veggie notes. And so in terms of extraction, one method could be applied which involves heat treatment of berries with high level of temperature so as to decrease the pyrazines and so decrease the perception of veggie characters. But this treatment will also extract a lot of unstable color that need to be stabilized with the help of oxygen during winemaking and aging. Oak could be also a good component to take into account within the process. And in general, we choose some vanilla oak profile because the contribution of vanilla will decrease as well the veggie perception in wines. And also, we will choose some very sweet and mouthfeel oak profiles so as to develop the mouthfeel and decrease the acidity of this kind of wine. Then the second case, which is the harvest during the ripe fruit window. Like we said this morning with Cecilia, every grapes variety has its own windows in terms of ripe fruit or fresh fruit. So considering that we can reach that ripe fruit, then the difference between the case number one is, in that case, we don't need to decrease the veggie notes because they are not yet. And so the objective is really to increase the ripe fruit. So we can use more moderate temperature of pre-fermentative extraction, or even cold soaking, so as to extract the fruit and anthocyanins. We can also use a post-fermentative maceration so as to extract viscosity from the berries and get more mid-palate. In terms of oxygen, as the reactivity is going lower, as the ripeness is more important, the quantity of oxygen should be lower as well. And in terms of oak profile, I would say that we would choose probably some spicy, toasty oak profile so as to enhance the ripe fruit from the grapes. The last scenario, which is the most common, is the late harvest. And in this kind of vintage, it's not the easiest one to manage because we have some challenging that could come with that. In general, the people that choose that picking day strategy think that they will compensate the lack of polyphenolic by waiting longer. And in general, I would say that it's a good strategy, like Cecilia showed this morning regarding the sweetness. The longer you wait, the more the sweet you get. But on some specific situation, like if blacks experience some water stress, there are some tricky situations to deal with, like dry tannins. So the main risk in this case is extraction of dry tannins that are impossible to change with oxygen or in other ways. The fining is the only solution. And so in that case, we choose some cold soaking so as to extract more anthocyanins than tannins and to avoid the extraction of tannins. But there is also another option that is commonly practiced in Burgundy that could use a post-fermentative temperature shock that could be applied just a few hours before pressing so as to destroy all skin cells and release into the wines polysaccharides that will enhance the mouthfeel. So that's the kind of things. Concerning oak and oxygen, it's something similar to the case number two, fine-tuning of case number two. So that means moderate oxygen supply and spicy toasty oak so as to enhance the fruit and stabilize the color. So as you understood, this kind of vintage requires a constant adaptation of winemaking. And in particular, it needs to be precise on the grape profile potential and to know precisely what were the characteristics of the ripeness so as to anticipate the process. And then to be able to apply precisely when and how to extract polyphenols and add oxygen. And here, for example, is just a real case scenario that we conducted in one of our clients in 2019 so as to enhance the quality with an automated process with our solution Scalia, so to help people to drive a very precise process. So as a conclusion, there are many ways to improve the quality of wines during winemaking. This requires a good understanding of the grape profile, to know how to adapt the process to the grape potential, and then to be able to carry out precisely the most appropriate process. And I would say these are the stakes of improving the quality of wine are at this price. Thank you. On time.